Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Be Good Leadership. I am Ronnie Caldwell, and as always, we're giving some advice on things that might be able to help you in your leadership journey, but most importantly, in everyday life as well. So, I think for as long as I can remember, or as long as anyone has been studying and knowing about humans, we compare ourselves to others. And I've always heard the advice, don't compare yourself. Don't compare yourself to other people. Worry about what you do. Stop comparing yourself to others. That's, good advice, but it's very difficult. We naturally do it, right? We're naturally comparing ourselves to how others are doing. We're looking at what others, we want to sort of measure ourselves up against others to a great extent. And this sometimes can be helpful in that, hey, what we're striving towards, right? We know that this person is at this particular level in a particular craft or a sport or something that we would like to do. And we'd like to be there at some point in time. But what I have found is that it's much more helpful to me to just see things as people are different. People are different. They have different abilities, different skills, and that's okay. That's awesome. That's how it should be. And there are going to be people who can do things that I can't do, and there's going to be me who I can do things that other people can't do, right? So, for instance, I love that there's a quote by Bruce Lee where he says that there's only one human family under the sun. He says, and it just so happens that people are different. And it reminded me another conversation I'd had with my mentor. His name was Bob Good. I consider him kind of a mentor teacher that I had early on in my career. And he was about to retire. And we were having a discussion, and he said in his Northeastern accent, he was like, Caldwell, he said, the world needs all types, me and you included. That's what makes life interesting and beautiful, right? And I have chosen ever since then to take on more and more of that view of things in general. Is that um, the human kaleidoscope is endlessly compelling and interesting, and that I don't have to be like others. People don't have to be like me. But what I can do, and what it ends up happening is I end up being just more interested and kind of fascinated by people and how they act and how they behave, right? To say, man, that's interesting. I often say life is rich and compelling. Actually, got that from a movie, but when I say it, what I mean by that is that, man, there's going to be different ways to handle problems. There's going to be different ways that people react to different things, and they're not going to be exactly the way I would react. And there's going to be things that I know that basically I'm going to need other people to be strong in particular areas that I'm not strong in, and that's okay. And to be interested in the things that I'm interested in, and to try to get better at the things that I want to get better at, and allow other people to do what they do, helps you in life in so many different ways. It helps you to stop comparing yourself so often, and to let people be who they are and let yourself be who you are. And I think that when we also are able to admit and be okay with the fact that people are different, and that there's a whole number of things that just get done well by people doing things differently. I think this happens in schools so often. I think I've never been at a school that graded exactly the same, that had all the exact same systems, um, that had all the exact same curriculum. But I've also met people in every one of those schools who 100% believed that whatever curriculum they currently had, whatever system they were currently using, whatever way of grading they were currently grading as, was the way. And that if you didn't do it that way, you were doing a disservice to kids. However, most all the schools I've worked at overseas were matriculating kids at the same schools. Kids were going to the same universities. Kids seem to be going off to a good life. Kids seem to be learning, even though they weren't doing it exactly the way that this last school was. And it's tough because when you have this realization, it becomes tough because within education, I think, and probably within every field, there's always a new initiative being sold. There's a new kind of answer to everything that's being sold. And you always have your zealots. You have your people who are 100% convinced that this is the right way to go. I remember, when Lucy Calkins was a big thing, a writer's workshop, reader's workshop, and it was coming into some schools internationally. There were so many teachers who were sort of gaslit into this idea that if you had any problems with it or any critiques, you were old school, so you needed to be out, right? When you first had one-to-one laptops, and there were some people who were worried that one-to-one laptops might not be the best thing, or we should, maybe balance this out. You're old school. You're being left behind. Everything else, and now, but you have entire countries getting rid of laptops for kids, right? So I think you want to have this balance, and when that comes back to me to this idea that I don't need to compare a bunch of different things. And what I also need to know is that there are people who, just as schools can do education in a lot of different ways, and that there might be just different schools doing different things, but kids are still going to universities, kids are still getting an education and going on to live rich lives. People can get things done in different ways. I've seen great teachers who all have little different styles, right? There's some moves, there's particular things that, like, I've never seen a great teacher who doesn't check for understanding. I've never seen a great teacher who isn't really clear about what it is they're trying to teach and what they want the kids to get out of the lesson. But I've seen that look a whole bunch of different ways, right? I've seen it look a whole bunch of different ways. I've never seen a great teacher who didn't give feedback on how kids could improve or how their students can improve, but that hasn't always looked the same. The way I look at it is like music. There's only so many notes on a saxophone, but man, there's a lot of different ways and styles people can play the saxophone. There's only so many notes in particular music, but there's all kinds of styles, right? There's only so many techniques in a particular martial art, but man, there's different styles, right? The person can, boxers, there's only so many punches in boxing. However, there's a lot of different styles, right? So rich and compelling. And this idea of when we start to compare, what we're really comparing is what is average? What are we saying? Like, we oftentimes start to say, well, what's the average person like? Well, I think the word average, I remember reading one time that we didn't really start applying that to people and lives until like the 1900s, right? Maybe 1800s, early 1900s, we started, but it was mostly an economic term. But what is an average life? What does that actually mean, right? It doesn't really, lives are different. People do different things, and there's not really an average. There's only what that person actually comes to the fore with. And I just choose to see that as rich and compelling, and that people are different, as we said, and they do things in a different way. And when you come to this, when you realize that there's different styles, different ways that people respond to things, you just naturally end up being a bit more compassionate. You naturally end up learning more from the situations that you're in. You naturally end up being able to cooperate better with people, because you know that since you stop comparing everything to some artificial absolute or some artificial average or the way things are supposed to be, instead of just becoming interested in the way things are, whether in this organization or with these people, you actually, when you do that, you become more attuned to working with, moving forward, and finding the ways to do what needs to be done in that relationship, in that organization, or in that situation. Because we stop comparing, because we compare just a little bit less. So, as I said, at the end of the day, comparing is normal. It's something that we kind of naturally do. But if we can get into the mind frame of being completely fascinated by the different ways in which people achieve meaningful outcomes in life and in an organization, we can become more humble, a bit more compassionate, and a little bit easier to learn. All right. As always, the advice is free, and you don't have to take it. Y'all be good.